Hey everybody, this is Craig Garber. Welcome to Everyone Loves Guitar. We are going to show some serious love to the rhythm section today. I'm with one of the coolest cats around, one of the most successful drummers around, with Shawn Pelton out of New York City. I want to give a quick shout out to Neil Jason, our mutual friend. Thanks for hooking us up. We definitely appreciate it. Make sure you go to everyonelovesguitar.com/subscribe and subscribe to the audio and video of the show. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and the bell. That would help us out. All righty, Shawn Pelton moved to New York City in the late 1980s. He's been a first call session drummer ever since. He's recorded with a very wide range of artists since moving to the city, and he's known for his great feel, his deep, soulful pocket, and his high level of musicianship across a broad range of styles. And let me tell you, this guy's got a great work ethic, man. He is, boom, the best. He's recorded with, this is like a pimple on the elephant's ass, like the names I'm going to read. Artists such as Sheryl Crow, Rod Stewart, Bruce Springsteen, Elton John, Billy Joel, Van Morrison, Pink, Kelly Clarkson, Five for Fighting, Natalie Merchant, Ingrid Michaelson, Michelle Branch, Regina Spektor, Tears for Fears. What a great duo those guys were. Citizen Cope, Matisyahu, Jonathan Brooke, David Byrne, the Goo Goo Dolls, Gavin DeGraw. I had Billy Norris on the show a long time ago, his guitar player. Peter Wolf, Edie Brickell, Mark Cohn, Richie Havens, Joan Osborne, Hall & Oates, the great Odetta, Pavarotti, Philip Phillips, George Michael, Carole King, Sugarland, Carly Simon, the Dixie Chiicks, Chris Bodie, Loudon Wainwright, Sarah Jarosz, and Buddy Guy. He's also played on many Grammy-winning albums for artists including Ray Charles, the Brecker Brothers, Rosanne Cash, Shakira, Shawn Colvin, William Bell, Les Paul, yes, the Les Paul, and the Hank Williams tribute album with Bob Dylan. He's got a rare ability to be at home playing on a top 10 track by Pink, recording with jazz legend Abbey Lincoln, and pop rock icon like Bob Dylan. He's also the longtime drummer in the house band for Saturday Night Live since 1992. Dude, that's like 1,000 dog years, man, isn't it? That's incredible. Shawn, that's great. Shawn attended Indiana University of Bloomington, and he studied with Kenny Aronoff, who we had here on the show a while back while he was there.
Yeah.
Shawn, thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh man, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here. What you're doing and the interviews, and so anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you, man. I love your man cave. I'm like zenned out just being in your zenned out presence there, man.
Yeah.
Where did you grow up, and like where are you from, and maybe what was your childhood like?
Yeah, kind of grew up in my parents are from Arkansas, and so spent some time there, and then Louisiana, Arkansas, and mostly in Missouri, kind of a small town. It's Warrensburg, which is about 50 miles east of Kansas City. And my mother taught at the school there, at the university. It was a small, like kind of state school. But what was lucky about being in that environment was there was still like a college music program in this sort of in the middle of the hayfield, kind of thing. And man, so it was fortunate. I felt fortunate to be around a scene where, because I had interest in music, that there was sort of like a college program there that as a grade school, in elementary school, I could go and take lessons with the people and the faculty and things like that, and but back then it was an interesting time because like in Missouri, they had the Stan Kenton big band camps that used to go around the country and do things, and I remember getting to go to a couple of those, which was amazing. And those Jamie Aebersold camps were around back then, my mom was really supportive. Parents were divorced, but my mom was sort of a, single parent household, and she was always supportive because she knew I was interested in music, and got to go to Berkeley School of Music for a summer program, for high school kids and stuff like that. So, man, I've been lucky, to have opportunities like that. And the other thing that was interesting about Missouri and growing up there is I was fortunate to start working at a really young age. Like I was playing bar band gigs, by the time I guess I was in 10th grade, and VFW halls and different things like that. But man, that was really helped put the drum thing in a focus of also working, you know, like I was really into the jazz thing, and one of those weird kids that listens to John Coltrane, you know, Elvin with Coltrane, like when you're in high school and all that kind of stuff. But then I'd have to go out and play country music in the bars, you know, or rock and roll, and
Yeah.
the whole thing. So that I was pretty fortunate to have like I've always had this really broad thing. I've had to swim in a lot of different streams, you know, and but growing up in Missouri and the Midwest and Arkansas and all that, is fortunate to have been able to take advantage of some of the things that were around, you know, education wise, you know.
Yeah. It's unusual that at such a young age to have such a diverse interest. You know, usually you're at that age, you're listening to the three things your buddies are listening to, and that's it. What do you think made you so different as far as like your thirst for knowledge almost musically?
Well, it's interesting because if, you know, when you go to school in you know, USA, it used to be that, you know, like everybody had to take a music class and stuff like that. And then sort of if you show interest and you're into it, like, you know, the band sort of has the thing where you can be in the jazz band and stuff like that. So that really opened up the whole jazz thing. And I really loved it, you know, and then went on to Bloomington as a jazz, you know, got like, that was, you know, I had to audition to get into music school, and it was sort of a hoo-ha, big, you know, a big music school there.
It is. It's Bloomington's great music school. Yeah.
So I sort of I went there for the whole jazz program, you know, and so that I had a passion for that, but it was wild about, you know, all your friends in Missouri and like, you know, just setting up and playing Leonard Skinner songs or Bad Company or Zeppelin, you know, and all that kind of stuff too. Because like you said, usually that's what, you know, your friends. And so, you know, that I was wild. And then to actually start working at a young age and having to, you know, learn the wide diversity of doing like kind of a top 40 country / rock gig. So that's kind of how it happened, you know, if that makes any sense. The school thing took you towards the jazz thing in a way if you were interested in it. And then, but just hanging out was sort of the rock thing, country thing in Missouri.
Were your parents musically inclined at all, or?
No, not at all. Yeah, my mother, no, nobody really had that thing, and it was just something I kind of always was inside of me. It's funny though, talking about like, you know, music was a required class, and I know back then when, you know, we were in a small town, you know, like if you're into music, it's not sometimes the coolest thing. So yeah,
really,
if you were in the well, it was kind of like if at that age, like you wanted, you know, if you played basketball and were in sports and stuff, you know. So anyway, so all the guys thought we were tough guys. We actually ended up going into the orchestra first because you didn't have to buy an instrument. If you were in band, you sort of had to make a commitment to buy an instrument. So I played cello like in 5th and 6th grade, but then I got out of that as soon as possible and went over to the band, you know, because it was just something I always wanted to do. You know?
Sure.
So yeah, so that started that. But that sort of being in that university environment or college thing that had a music program, by like sort of taking private lessons there, it would help me get an audition together to get into like a really great school, like, you know, something like Bloomington and stuff like that. So, and then that was just amazing being around at that time. And, you know, like you mentioned Kenny Aronoff, like he's like a little bit older and he'd already graduated, and that was right at that window when the John Cougar thing, Mellencamp exploded with Jack and Diane and all that stuff. And man, for Kenny, you know, I just followed him around like a little puppy dog and would watch him play and took, you know, lessons. And he was so giving, and being around him and seeing, you know, his work ethic, man, and how he handled situations. And he would talk to me about, you know, things beyond paradiddles, like, you know, working with people, being in situations where handling things that would come up. And man, what was just, wow, so lucky. Kind of mentor thing that I've been exposed to with different people. At that time too, I got to go study with Alan Dawson, because it's weird. The Bloomington thing, they had a jazz program at IU, but there wasn't an applied music drum set teacher. It was sort of this percussion program, but they had a jazz thing. It's hard to explain, but there wasn't like at that time in the early 80s, someone who just taught drum set, you know. So I got to go away for a couple summers. I stayed with like an ex-girlfriend's brother-in-law stepdad. It's really like this wild connection. Got to like, if I mowed the yard and took care of everything, I could kind of stay in the basement, you know. And it was near, Alan taught at that time out of Lexington, Massachusetts. And, you know, man, to sit and be able to hang with the guy who like taught Tony Williams and stuff, you know, and go through he's taught so many great drummers, man. And that was a huge break to be able to hang out with him and learn, you know. Very, very systematic way of teaching. Like the lessons were broke up in 3 20-minute segments, you know, and it was like, he'd give you 3 rudiments a week, you know, and you had to drill down with that. And it ended up like, he had this thing called the ritual, which was like over 180 rudiments. You had to memorize it, and then you had to play it in 4-bar phrases, and they all strung together over like a bass drum pattern, like a samba thing or something like that. Really incredible, like fundamental type approach, you know, amazing. And then there was this thing he did with the syncopation book, which I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's a Ted Reed wrote this book called Syncopation. Anyway, it's kind of a very influential book, but all it is really just simple rhythms. And he had all these different ways of like going through that book, because it was just rhythms, but he would apply these different concepts to it. And then the last 20 minutes you would play with him, like he would play vibes and you would do a song, you know, and play together and do the music kind of thing. But when I look back to think that I had the opportunity to do that, you know, it's like, wow, you know. And then had the exposure also to Kenny, you know, and the people that were at IU then, the actual players, you know. I got in a band, and man, the level of musicianship, we were working and playing the, you know, frat parties and the bars and stuff, like Crystal Talafero. I don't know if you know that name. She's an amazing musician.
Yeah.
She plays percussion.
Yep. But she plays saxophone too, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know exactly who she is.
She was in this band that we were all in, you know, and they just did an article on her in Rolling Stone. She's had the most incredible career, like Springsteen to Joe Cocker to the Bee Gees to like, she's with Billy Joel now forever, and just an amazing inspiration. So, you know, it's like, wow. So I'm in a band, you know, with the level of musicianship was like Crystal. And then Crystal Mellencamp comes and takes Crystal away to go on the road after about 1.5 years, you know. And then this guy, Everett Bradley, came in, who's another great musician, who's plays with, went out with Springsteen and is with Bon Jovi some now a lot, and has done tons of stuff. And around that time too, like Jim Beard was there. He was an amazing keyboard player, plays with Steely Dan now. This guy, John Harrington, who's the MD of Steely Dan, was around then. Bob Hurst, this incredible bass player that played with Wynton Marsalis, left school early to go with Wynton. So it was just like Chris Bodie was there. You know, this window of time, you know, where it's like all these great musicians, and then there's, you know, where I have access to Kenny and you know, and then I'm working. It's not just like head in the sand doing the jazz thing, you know. It's kind of like this, again, so fortunate to have this multi streams to have to swim in and survive in and play stylistically, you know, which I think really helped me in New York, or like a gig like Saturday Night Live, where you have to cover a lot of ground, you know. You have to pick up a pair of brushes sometimes and have that together, as well as like, you know, be able to hit hard and rock sometimes versus like not at all and swing. You know, it's just interesting, like the wide range of stuff, you know, that it seems like the more you can do, the easier it is to survive and make a living, you know, as far as just how much ground you can cover, you know.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned this, you touched on this when you mentioned Kenny, and I think it's a very important thing if you're cool to talk about it. You talked about how Kenny explained to you how you got to get along with people. I have to believe you're in the toughest market in the world, and you have played with, as you said, the widest range of artists. What would be the like top 2 or 3 things that you would say you're cognizant of as far as working with people to make that relationship? Look, like you're in the service business, and I know your work ethic, you're fully aware of that. So what are the top 2 or 3 things you do to make sure that you're being yourself, but you have this ability to work with all kinds of people, personalities, especially in New York, which is like, hey man, we need this done yesterday.
Yeah, yeah. That's such a great question. And the drum thing is particularly wild about that, like on gigs or sessions, because, to have a sensibility of on a radar for maybe what people need or want or are looking for. And there's times where you'll be hired maybe because they think you're bringing something to the table and they want your input. And man, there's other times where it's the complete opposite of that. Like they really just want a human drum machine that will shut up and do what they want,
Yeah.
And then other times they don't want that. They need someone to come in with like a strong sense of opinion about what should happen and conviction about it. So it's so wild. Like that's like so on such complete opposite ends of the spectrum, It's wild. I remember stories about like Al Jackson, they would say, and they said this about Buddy too, Buddy Rich, that such a strong personalities. Like if you asked that, hey man, the tempo, is this a little too fast or a little too slow? I mean, they would say that they almost kick your ass for like, what are you asking?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. It's their gig, and you're like, yeah.
I'm the drummer, and here it is, and kiss my ass because this is where it is, and I'm going to take charge, and here we go.
Right.
Versus, I remember reading something about like Ben Riley, a great jazz drummer, played with Monk, and he was talking about sort of like family style. Just maybe someone would kind of tune off, someone else would. There were no like ego attachments to this kind of thing. And it's funny in talking about this, I'm not even arguing that one is better or worse. It's more about like being able to read a situation for what's needed,
Right.
And it can change from like from one song to the other with same artist, but one song or the other. And there's times, man, where they really want you to take charge as a drummer and steer the ship. And, and then, man, there's other times where they don't want that at all. They want someone who can melt into a situation and hear what's happening and sit in it. And, so, and all the ranges in between, it's really, and so it's interesting about kind of having a sensibility, know when to shut up, know when to say, when to have an idea, when not to have an idea. There's this famous artist that said, because I hate a motherfucker with a good idea or something, and it was just like his point was like, man, can I just get my vision of this thing down before everybody starts chiming in about, oh, what about the bridge? We do this, or how about this chord change for that?
That's funny,
just
man.
Like, yeah.
I hate a motherfucker with a good idea. That's great.
Right. But then, the other side of the coin is that they'll call people sometimes because, when a song comes up and, somebody's first impression part-wise, like as a player, any instrument that you play, do you have 7 other ideas or more to try, like that's what's interesting about sessions is that, it's not always the greatest player, but the player about parts and a sensibility for parts, how to leave space, when to not leave space and like all the different variations of that, but having a radar for that and a sensibility for parts and getting a sound and, working with people, that working with people thing is just huge, and having a radar for a sensibility of that.
Okay, I want to ask you one more question about this because I don't want to beat this to death. But you mentioned this one word 3 times, and I think that's exactly what you mentioned the word radar 3 times, and I think that's exactly what you need. Where did you, or why do you think your radar is so well developed?
Yeah, man, I don't know, except, being around Kenny and coming up, it was a huge influence because he would talk about things like that, about working with people in the studio. And then, if you make mistakes, there's mistakes I've made about where maybe I've been assertive about an idea that I might have had where it might have been smarter to just shut up and let the people in charge, it's an interesting thing. Maybe Hal Blaine or somebody made a comment once about it was important that the people in charge feel like that they're getting this done,
Yes.
and not, and that's it's a really interesting thing, knowing when to again, what's a saying about never pass up a good opportunity to not open your mouth, or you know, something like that. But then, you know, it's interesting what you were saying about being true to yourself and not being like a yes man and actually having opinions and convictions. And there's times that people want that from who they're hiring, you know.
Yeah.
And knowing what that, you know, and also the interesting thing is it's being able to let go, you know, like if you have something, like there was this Brecker Brothers track that I got to play on, and it's an interesting example of this thing about letting go. Like the drummer who played on it is one of my heroes. It doesn't matter his name. And, you know, he heard this thing kind of like a second line march, really swampy, cool as hell approach, right? But the producers wanted something with more space. They didn't want all this shit filling up the track. They needed space, like, you know, some kind of airy thing that still was funky and had this underlying thing, but not just so filled up. And so the drummer talking about that ended up, you know, they ended up replacing, really was just so vested in his concept and his conviction about what it should be. And so this flexibility thing about being able to come in and see what's happening, and the other guys, they're paying you to come in and kind of give them what they're trying to find, but also, you know, that give and take with that whole thing. Like, and it's all shades of like varying degrees. There's times where they really want you to solve the problem and please just come in and make this happen. And then there's other times where, no, we know exactly what we're hearing for you to do and do this, you know. And then can you give them that? And
yeah,
you know, so all the various shades of all that, you know. But this ability to let go, you know, too, like, because music is so interesting. Like, you know, our hearts are so connected to what we're doing, and if you have strong conviction about your attachment to the way you're approaching something, to be able to sort of stop on a dime and let go of that and refocus into another thing, which maybe you don't even agree with or believe in or think it's really bad idea.
Right.
But there's been times, man, where I've seen sessions where people have thought we're going down the worst road possible, and at the end of it, it's like great, you know.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So it's wild.
I know exactly.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Yeah.
When a buddy of mine, I was working this program recently, and a buddy of mine made a comment to me. It has to do with attachment, sort of, to the end result. He goes, you know, Craig, because I was telling him, man, you know, I come to the conclusion that being attached to the result of something is never in my best interest. And he said, yeah. And he put it this way. I don't know where he got this from. He goes, you don't want to be part of the results committee. And I was like, oh my God, that was like nailed it perfectly, because that, you know, that gave me the opportunity to, yeah, that's a result. Now I could be out of that committee. All I could be responsible for is like what I'm doing, and then what the results are if I'm not attached to that. So I get the feeling that you're very good with that. Were you always good with that, or is that like something that's come with age?
No, that's come with experience of, like, you know, when you're there and you really having a hard time seeing another way of approaching this, like, you know, having banged your head up against the wall with that enough times that you realize, man, this doesn't do any good. Or, you know, being called into, like, in that situation I'm talking about, where you're replacing someone because they were unable to sort of let go, you know, like,
yeah, they couldn't detach.
Right. And, you know, and I'm sure it's happened both ways. You know, we all get replaced on things,
sure,
for various reasons and stuff like that. But it's, you know, seeing that go down and being sort of open, you know, to what an artist or producer, if they have something in mind that's not really what you're resonating with. Anyway, all of that's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, man.
Yeah.
Okay, so you moved to the city, if I understand correctly. You had a touring gig lined up with an artist named John Eddy that I think Kenny, if I remember listening to an interview, Kenny hooked you up. Was Kenny couldn't do the gig or something?
Yeah. So, you know, this guy, John Eddy, who was on Columbia at the time, and, you know, really interesting story about, he was managed by Tommy Mottola, and so his second record, he was out in Bloomington working on it with the Mellencamp guys, at that studio. And so they finished the record, and then obviously Kenny couldn't leave Mellencamp's thing to go, with a new artist. So
Yeah.
I was still hanging out in Bloomington. I'd already graduated, but I was still working a lot in that band. We were doing tons of gigs, and I always hoped to somehow have an opportunity to go to a bigger city, but kind of with some kind of gig as opposed to just showing up and washing dishes and trying to make it happen. So, man, this was really lucky. But it was wild being, he was on Columbia, and about almost everything that could possibly go wrong in a major label situation did. Like the record came out, but it was when the payola thing, the investigation of that. There's a book called Hitman that really dives into some of this stuff with, like, the payola thing in the music business. So anyway, the record comes out, but it doesn't get promoted very heavily at all. So we get dropped from Columbia, and we get picked up by Elektra. And then Neil Young's producer came in, produced the record. I saw, like, I don't know, $400,000 or $500,000 go down on a record that we did up in Dreamland at the time. So this would have been like 89 or 90 up in Woodstock. And, so we cut the record as a band, which is an amazing feeling to be a part of something where you're, and it's a major label thing on Elektra. And then they don't put the record out. And so then it's kind of like we were still gigging and playing up and down the East Coast, that whole Northeast corridor club scene.
Yeah.
But it sort of fell apart, and I just sort of started trying to survive in New York and freelancing and stuff. And then that led to, like, a whole scene in New York at the time that was like the Bitter End and that whole Bleecker Street scene.
Oh, that was so awesome, man. That was that was the best, man. Yeah.
So there was a whole singer-songwriter kind of thing, and then a blues thing in town at that point, and around Jersey. And so I sort of, that was the transition into freelancing around New York, and then that's what led to the audition for Saturday Night Live, like about a year and a half or so freelancing. I knew the bass player that was doing SNL. And the great Matt Chamberlain had done it for 1 year. This would have been 91, I guess. And he decided he was going to not continue to do it. And so they had some auditions. And GE was running the band then. He called Paul Asola, was playing bass, said, "Hey, man, Matt's going to leave. We're looking to need to audition some drummers. Do you know anybody?" And I just played with Paul the night before at the Lone Star Roadhouse that was in Midtown.
Yeah, yeah.
And, it was, the thing about the New York freelance community is so wild. Like, I mean, it was a great band. Like, Paul was on bass, and the Uptown Horns were on the gig. And
they used to announce them, G.E. Smith and the Uptown Horns. I remember that, man. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So that led to the whole Saturday Night Live thing. It was an audition, and it was at SIR. And, it was sort of like just show up and play, and GE would start, and man, he didn't say what we were doing. He would just start playing. And then it was like, I was so hungry about it, doing it. And then it was just like, man, let's go. Let's just blow this place the fuck up, man. As far as, yeah. And I felt really good about the audition, because it was just, I think what he was looking for was sort of where I was coming from back then, which was sort of kind of simple, but a lot of heart, and the feel thing, trying to, like, to focus completely on that, but sort of in your face and rocking, and had an aggressiveness to it, but had a wide range. And then GE's thing was just real, big and rocking and crazy. And so, man, I remember walking out of there going, well, I don't think that could have gone better musically, as far
That's great, man.
Yeah. And
good
so,
for you. That is...
So, got hired, but it was sort of like it was for just 2 shows to see,
probation,
work.
double secret probation.
Yeah, because I think, the thing about that gig that's interesting, and that the reason why you only got hired for the first 2 shows to see if you could, there's sort of like a whole another level of the pressure thing with the live TV, and, there's not really any do-overs, you just kind of had to make it happen and do it,
Yeah.
And at that point, G would sometimes just walk out and start playing and not even tell us what we were going to do. We'd be live on TV, and he'd look back at me and he'd point to his ear, and then he'd
like,
just
listen.
start playing. Yeah, and then just
Wow.
fall. And I don't know if that was because, I mean, it was an exciting as hell. I mean, it was
Yeah.
visceral and exciting when he would do, because it's like, oh shit, we're live on TV. And I don't know if that's because of his years with playing with Bob Dylan, because I know Bob, sometimes we just go. And I think G tells a story about how a lot of times the photos with Bob, like the guitarists are like, if Bob is here, like the guitarists are looking this way so they can see his fretboard to even see what key Bob's, going into, as far as on some of the things back in the day, I guess, But anyway, it was exciting, man. I was like, and by that time I was 29 when I started. So I'd already been through like the major label thing and seen it all implode, like being in a band where you really are vested in this thing and wanting, and then seeing, it kind of just blow up in your face and not happen and get dropped and the record not coming out and all the money going down into a record that, so that was really interesting. But that whole freelance thing was wild because, I mean, I didn't necessarily come to New York to do a lot of singer-songwriter gigs, but it just happened by surviving, because on Bleecker Street, that's what you ended up sort of doing. Like, if you were freelancing, you were playing with a lot of singer-songwriters and blues gigs, like I said, and like Joan Osborne was around then. I got to play with Joan. I love Joan.
Oh, that's nice, man.
And playing with her, she was so great. But it developed a whole another skill and sensibility, which was about, playing for the song and the whole thing about lyrics and volume. And the interesting thing about New York is, I've been coming from Kenny's thing, which was very physical. He's such a great, strong, but he has a wide range. He can do so much. But what was wild about New York was all of a sudden the rooms are not, they're not like sheds or outdoor stadiums.
Oh, you're in the club, a tiny little club sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
So, like the whole volume approach, let's say, of handling a room like that, and the great rock drummers that New York sort of has, like with your Steve Jordan and Charlie Drayton and all those great musicians, it was, I mean, one of the first things that's so interesting in New York or kind of anywhere is how a musician plays a room, like their thing with volume and balance of how in New York, it's a real interesting thing to be aware of. Like, is a drummer being sensitive to the space he's in or just sort of going for it? So that's interesting about how that evolved into a lot of singer-songwriter gigs. And then I got that lucky break with playing on that Shawn Colvin record, Few Small Repairs, which I think was in '97. And that, that was like record of the year and song of the year or something crazy like that, and one of the first times I think I heard myself on the radio, and it was like, oh my God, it's so crazy.
Are you the longest tenured SNL band member?
No, it's wild. Like those horn players, like Lenny Pickett runs the band now, who's an amazing musician. That band is such so incredible music. Like James Genus plays bass from plays with Herbie Hancock now, but played with everybody, and Steve Turre, the great jazz trombonist, Alex Foster, who runs the Mingus band in town, is an alto player. Anyway, so many great musicians, but Leon Pendarvis, the organ player, has been there like the longest, and I think since the early 80s. And then Lenny and that group of horn players, they might have started in '86 or something like that. And I came in '92, so they've actually been there longer, which is, it's such a blessing and amazing to have some kind of consistent, steady gig.
Oh my God.
And it's like,
in the biggest marketplace for 30 years. Come on, man.
Yeah.
That's like,
I mean, yeah, it's insane. And the other thing that's lucky about it is that we're there, but it's not like, I've subbed over at Letterman sometimes and the Conan thing. And it's just wild how, that is like 4 days a week, 2 shows on Thursday, and there's weeks off, but I mean, it's a real commitment to kind of your time and your flexibility as far as being able to do other things and stuff, but it's such a so lucky. Wow.
I actually had Christine Ullman. She's been there a long time. I had her on the show here. She's been there a long time too, hasn't she?
Yeah. She's great. And she goes back to GE and those guys.
Yeah. She played with GE like when they were kids. I think they knew they played. Yeah.
in Connecticut.
Yeah.
She knows all that whole Connecticut scene. That Mickey Curry was a part of that, great drummer, and then Paul Lasolo, the bass player we were talking about, he goes back to them. And Big Al from NRBQ, I think he's part of that
Big Al
Connecticut
Anderson.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But she's great. Yeah, great.
Thank you for sharing that story. I know you've said it a bunch of times. I hope that's the only thing I'm going to ask you that you've been asked a bunch of times. So thanks. You're like very good about it. You said it. If you were an actor, I would have given you an Academy Award. It seemed like it was the first time you ever said it, Shawn. I want to talk about Love Rocks concerts. You did that for the last 3 years, and I think you enjoyed that double drumming with Steve Gadd. Talk about that, how it came about, and what did you enjoy most?
Yeah, it's such a unique opportunity. There's not a lot of gigs where you're double drumming. And then all of a sudden you're like double drumming with this iconic legend like Steve Gadd. It's kind of like, fuck, wow. And man, he's one of these guys that is such an inspiration just to be around his airspace. Like he listens, he takes things in. He's so soulful, so musical. Like this last year we did, he's sort of on the left, I'm on the right. So, if you're playing, like I can actually, it's great because I can see him and we can, lock in and all that whole thing. But like this year, he sort of adjusted his kit to where, a lot of times he plays with 4 toms, and he took this tom down and only 1 4 tom, and then put his music stand so that there was like this communication thing between us, and eye contact and stuff. And his willingness to even adapt to that, to his big picture sensibilities about music and the task at hand and working together, and like, he made me feel so comfortable, and just magic spirit. And his approach and sound on the kit, like his touch and the way he balances the instrument, like he's got a really great his foot and the way he balances the level of his right foot, and it's always there, and gets one of the most beautiful cross stick sounds. Sometimes it can be hard to get a cross stick sound, like a consistent like knock and stuff. And so just his touch, and also he's still in love with drums and the process. Like he's still working on rudimental type combinations and the way they can voice out over the drums, and like, say, hey man, check this out. It's a 6-stroke roll thing, but if you start here on it, and like, it's amazing to be around someone like that that's still so enthusiastic. You feel their love and enthusiasm about music,
Yeah, and he's been doing it for a while. It's not like he's rookie.
Yeah.
And
like the artists have been off the charts. I mean, like Robert Plant and we did Asia. I mean, I didn't do Asia, but like he did Asia with Steely Dan, and get to watch him do that iconic stuff, and but double drumming with him and being around him and just the whole thing, and how his human side is a soulful spirit, and it's hard to put into words just what great an opportunity it's been. I just feel so lucky, for 3 years to do it, and be with him.
Man, you've got like, there's only been one other person, unfortunately, I can't remember it. Your radar is up, man. I just get that. I could see how you are like a sponge wherever you go.
Oh man,
yeah.
Well,
That's very apparent.
Well, there's so much. It's interesting with drums or musicians in general, but with drummers, like any drummer, it's so wild how you can learn, even if it's like learning maybe what not to do.
That's really important, man.
There's so much you can take, if you're being aware and sensitive, and like, well, why is that working? Why does this feel so good? The drum thing is so interesting. Like when it comes to feel and pocket, it's like, man, what is happening? Why is there so much magic to this? Like, like drummer A going, compared to like maybe 100 cats. Like, so, well, what's happening? Is it the, the volume level of the bass drum with the hi-hat? Is it the shading of the hi-hat? Is it the sound of the drums muffled, or is it open, the context? But there's so much going on, when it comes to feel. And it's interesting with drums because you're really in a hot seat, because if something doesn't feel right, it really lays in your, it's on your lap.
You're 100%.
yeah, and you know, to sort of have the mental strength to deal with that, and the confidence, and also, you know, the flexibility to learn from it. Like, okay, so yeah, that's not working. I got to adjust that. Or, you know, like I'll always tape myself on gigs or take something, because if something maybe wasn't working, I'm able to go back and check it. You know, or
Yeah.
something was great. Oh, why was that so great? Or
There's
you
a
know,
lot of
someone makes a
moving
comment.
parts in drums. There's a lot of moving parts going on all at
Yeah.
once that you're responsible for.
Yeah, and with the mystery of the feel thing is so interesting, and the confidence. Like if a band has confidence in their drummer, you know, and
Yeah.
that's what's wild about these situations, like these multi-artist situations, and like, you know, with Steve, or like I've done the Songwriters Hall of Fame for the last, like, you know, 10 or 15 years, and you know, like Aerosmith was on once, and you know, it's like you've got 15 seconds to make an impression to Steven Tyler that
Yeah.
you've got your shit together, like the tempos together, you know. And then what does that mean? Like, does that mean they do Walk This Way like the record, or they actually do it a lot faster now? And then did you kind of wipe your ass and go check it out on YouTube and do the homework about that, or did you just show up and do the record from 77, and meanwhile they haven't done it that way, let's say, for 30 years, or they do
Right.
it exactly like that, or, you know what I mean? It's just like wild. And then that gets into like that thing you're talking about, work ethic, about, you know, like this Songwriters Hall of Fame thing. It's so wild, like these situations where, you know, you got to play with Bonnie Raitt, and then she wants to do Angel from Montgomery, you know, before John Prine passed away last year when we did it. And so there's the record, but how has she done it for the last
Yeah.
year with her band, you know, and what does that feel like? And then, but she's going to do it with John. So how's John been doing it? And, you know,
Yeah.
you can see there's so much in the air there to like sort of maybe be sensitive to and aware of, if in those situations you've got to knock it out of the park and make the artist feel like they can turn around and they're in good hands, as opposed to like, oh man, what is this house band shit? Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Well, too, then
yeah.
then there's the danger of, because you are a guy who's, your like radar is just so up, then there's the danger of, am I overthinking this?
No, I
Because-
love it, because you can do all this homework. I remember talking to Will about that once. We were talking about, like, you know, preparing for sessions, or like sometimes people will send you an MP3, and then like it's so interesting, this range of like they send you something, and you know, sometimes people have put so much care into a demo that they have demo love of. Like Shakira was like this when I worked with her. Like it was very much about doing exactly what she had already put together, even if it was like really rudimentary. She was like, so, you know, that thing about demo love and stuff.
yeah, she was vested in the
Yeah.
demo.
And so I love what you're saying about the overthinking, because there's other times where like you get sent something and maybe you get attached to what you're learning. This whole thing about being flexible and letting go, but you get
Yeah.
attached to like learning it. And then it's like, no, man, it's not, that was just an idea and we don't even like it, you know, or this thing about tempos is interesting. Like, you know, maybe like this last Love Rocks, we did Sledgehammer
Yeah.
with Dave Matthews, and he does it live with his band, you know. And so we're all sent a version, and it's in a certain tempo, and it's a great kind of laid back pocket Sledgehammer, you know, I can't remember exactly, but live we came from it from another tune, and he was really hyped in the moment to want it to be faster, which was cool, and we just adapted and made it happen. But this is interesting, like at the line of scrimmage with those kind of things, like, you know, do you go with an artist because you can tell they're uncomfortable and they want it to be faster, or do you hold this down because they're just tripping and it's really going to be, somebody's got to keep this in the, you know, tucked in. And you know, it's interesting, like listening back to it is quite a bit faster than the way they do it when they do it, and that's fine, you know, that's
Right.
totally cool. It's like I'm not even trying to pass judgment, good or bad, but it's interesting about how having the flexibility, no matter how much homework you do, to be able to let go all of it in the heat of battle if you had to, or, you know, all that kind of shit. If
Well,
that makes any sense.
no, it does, because you're driving
Yeah.
the bus here, man, and you got to make
Yeah.
like you got a millisecond to say, is this fast or slow, period. And
Yeah.
that's it, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
you're driving the bus. So it's a pretty important thing, man. And not to blow smoke up your ass, but the simple fact that you're going through these machinations is why someone wants you, because you got that awareness of like, this is my responsibility. I totally accept it. I don't want to fuck it up.
Yeah. No,
which I think
and I
which
love
is
what you said.
great.
Yeah, and I love that, but it's interesting, like on the, it's so wild how we talk about these things in like opposites too. Like when I first started with the GE thing, like, man, it was all about where he was going to put it. And you better be there like white on rice. Like, and
Right.
I would watch his body motion. He was very physical,
Oh
and,
yeah.
there's other situations where, the person that is the MD really wants to take charge of tempos and count things off, because it's very much about, he's the MD and he feels like he's getting paid. He needs to be doing something,
Right.
or maybe, and I don't mean that in a negative way.
No.
So,
Yeah. You want to be respectful of somebody's job. Yeah, I get it. That's not ego.
So it's wild, like, that those shades of, again, what we were talking about, when somebody wants you to sort of take charge as a drummer, and when, man, they don't want that at all. They want someone who will follow and breathe with what's happening. And if it means speeding up and slowing down, it's cool. It's cool. This is organic and it's going to do this. And, it's wild, this generation that we're in, or this, so many things can be very grid orientated,
Yeah.
as far, and I, it's so wild. I've cut half of my brain out trying, I just have sort of let go about not, oh, is this good or is this bad? Or, everything's so quantized and gridded, and man, they just take, it's the interesting thing about sessions. At a certain point, it started to feel like, we all go in and play, but it comes through the whole grid mill anyway, that it can almost, at sometimes, depending on what kind of record it is,
Yes.
be anybody, on certain things, So, I didn't want to lose my train of thought, except to say that, there's times to take charge, and there's other times where they don't want that at all, which we were talking about. Yeah. Amen.
Dude, it's no wonder you meditate. I'm like, I feel I need a drink just listening to this. I'm exhausted just fucking listening to the whole thing that you have to go through. Holy shit. I need to meditate right now. Wow.
Yeah, no, hilarious. No,
man.
the drum, it's just the idea that the drum thing can be a hot seat.
Yes. Yeah. I was like joking, but I was serious. There's a lot going on here, man.
Yeah.
Which is a good transition to the next question. I saw in an interview that you read Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz, and you got a lot out of it. I love that book. It was one of the early sort of self-development books I got, and it got a big impact on me. Maybe not at the time, but it made me very aware of my subconscious mind.
Yeah.
And so talk about, like, what did you get out of the book? What prompted you? How'd you get into it?
Right.
And like, has it helped you? Have you executed, maybe not whatever's in the book, but what have you done with that?
Yeah. I was exposed to that book when I was in Bloomington, and I must have been a freshman or sophomore. And, so Chris Bodie was there, and they had this great trumpet teacher at the School of Music. Bill Adam was his name. And he was sort of an iconic, I think, trumpet teacher, and for lead players and like orchestral, the pressure of like the trumpet thing is so deep because you're so exposed, and the high note thing and being relaxed, and you're so exposed, So he would have all his students read this book because it built up a cycle of like positive thinking, about things. And like, the whole affirmations thing that's in the book. And I think it's interesting. The premise is the guy was, I think he was a cosmetic surgeon or something.
He was a plastic surgeon in the city.
Yeah. And the idea was that, he would go through these procedures with people, but it wouldn't really change. It's sort of about looking in, and the whole thing about, building this inner kind of strength and confidence. And so, along the lines of everything we've talked about, like with the drum thing, and to be able to have the confidence to, like, not shrivel under a live camera, or if like Steven Tyler's there and you're supposed to play and it's like, oh my God, but to actually have the belief in yourself as a drummer, to come to the table with something. So it really helped with that, man, and build a positive way of thinking, a circular positive way, as opposed to, doubt can breed doubt, and one's self-image as a musician. And so I feel lucky that I was exposed to this like when I was 18 or something like that, and it kind of got me on this awareness path of thinking positively about getting it together, you know. And it's wild that it came from the trumpet guy, because
Yeah.
his whole thing was to build confidence in the stress of being a lead trumpet player and being so exposed, and, you know, maintaining your focus through all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
Good book. Let
So
me just
anyway,
tell people what the book. This guy Maxwell Maltz was a plastic surgeon in New York City, and he kept having all these people coming in for surgery, and they would say, "Man, I still don't look right." And you know, he's looking at these people and he's saying, "My God, this is a beautiful woman, or this is a very attractive guy. What is wrong with them?" And so he came to the conclusion that it was, as Shawn was mentioning, it was deeper than that, and it had to do. I think that was the first book about subconscious mind, about, you know, that governs your decision making and how you feel about yourself and what to put in and what not to put in.
yeah, right.
Visualization.
Yeah, and then, you know, the positive thing versus like the focusing on the negative aspect of things. Because, you know, it's hard, man. This business is brutal, man. To, you know, sustain a career in the music business and try to stay positive through it, and, you know, not just for like 18 months, but, you know, decades of it or
Yeah.
something, you know. And so, amen,
Yeah,
amen.
man.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to ask you about some of the artists you've worked with. So if you could talk about how you got the gig and maybe a cool or interesting story about working with them. Let's talk about Buddy Guy first.
Well, you know, the Buddy Guy thing happened. We did a live record. The SNL band got hired to do a live record with him. And it was right after I started, maybe within a year and a half. And it was on this label, Silvertone. I think it got nominated for a Grammy. It was a live record. We went to Buddy Guy's place in Chicago. Um, what I remember that was interesting is that we rehearsed with Buddy a little bit, and because we had a horn section, so there were arrangements. It wasn't just head charts or something. And then, but his freewheeling kind of thing was like almost anything we rehearsed sort of went out the door by the on the gig, you know,
Yeah.
which was, it was cool and it was exciting. And the other thing I remember is he would drink a bottle of XO and to get to that space, you know, at Remy or
Yeah. Yeah. You know,
XO cognac, you know.
you
Yeah,
know, it's funny, man. I've seen him probably 4 or 5 times. I saw him the first time, like in the early 80s at the Beacon.
yeah,
I saw Johnny Winter and Buddy Guy with a bill. But you never know who you're going to get, which Buddy Guy you're going to get. Because sometimes you get
yeah,
the guy who, man, he must have just drinking a bottle of something,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and then you get the real sensitive Buddy Guy, and then you get the angry Buddy Guy sometimes. So it's always, you know, and he's always
yeah,
great. I've never seen a bad show yet, but he's always a different personality there.
yeah, yeah. But that was a lot of fun, man. A lot of fun. Yeah. Wow.
Uh, Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah, you know, I was lucky enough to play on a couple tracks. There's this box set called Tracks, and it was something I think he was working on in the late '90s, and it was sort of a retrospective of some outtakes and B-sides, and it was a couple tracks from the Tunnel of Love period, which was that, I think, sort of the late '80s, where there were a lot of drum machines involved. So he had some songs that he wanted to put real drums on, you know.
Oh, very cool.
And there was a song called Seven Angels, which is kind of like a rocking thing. And I remember we did a couple takes and it went great. And he would listen and his hand would go back and forth, you know, like at the time. And they said, man, it's just one of the hardest things to do is put yourself like you were in the room at the time it went down, you know. And I thought that was a nice
Yeah,
compliment, you know.
very much.
And then the other song was this song called Happy, which is kind of a ballad. And it's an interesting story about, you know, talk about letting go, because I had been doing like some of the songwriter things, like with that Colvin record, and it was right around the time that had some success. And John Leventhal, the great producer, guitarist, you know, we would always try to look for like left field ways sometimes of looking at things. And so I had this drum with me that was like Remo used to make these snare drums that had kind of a conga head on them. So it was like a conga head top and then a snare on the bottom, and you could turn it on and off. And so this one song, this Happy thing of Bruce's, I came up with this thing that I just thought was so cool. It was like a snare drum off and sort of maybe a tea towel on it, so it's sort of muted down like a Ringo thing. And then I had a Blastic kind of feathered, thick brush thing, and sort of had this Al Green look to it, and a kind of like some Ghost Note, Purdy type thing. I thought, oh my God, this is so feathered and cool, and the motion of this, I just love it. And then Bruce kept hearing just kind of a cross stick thing on 2 and 4. I was like, oh man, chance to do this song with Bruce. And I think this part is so cool and creative, and I kind of tried to do it while we were getting sounds. He's like, yeah. So I think we would try that with the cross stick, and I'd go back to cross stick, and then 5 minutes would go by, and I'd try to like sort of go back to that, Anyway, so we
were like the little kid trying to be naughty and didn't want dad to notice. Yeah.
And so we went back, we ended up with the cross stick, what he wanted. And then it was wild, like listening, I was kind of like, a little sad, like, oh no, it's like such a straight ahead, but I don't want to say pedestrian, but it felt that way at the time, kind of. But in listening back, it was wild, just the cross stick thing, because the lyric was a little bit about the passage of time, and then the space of just the cross stick instead of this thing that had like the Al Green lope to it. It made sense 6 months later when I finally heard it, like, oh man, yeah, has more space. Like the big picture, this idea of like crawling out of your own thing and seeing the big picture, which is, like amazing about those guys like Steve Gadd and all that. That perspective of seeing the thing from way up above,
Yeah, sure. Are you English? Because you called it a tea towel. Nobody calls it a tea towel except English.
Yeah, no, I think that's because of the connection with like Ringo when he first started doing some of that in the late '60s with the Beatles. It's like, oh, we put the tea towel on the floor.
Yeah, nobody calls it. My wife's English. That's the only reason I know, because she's always calling them tea towels.
Yeah.
That's funny.
But that deader thing, that putting something like that, really can alters the sound, obviously.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. What'd you do with Peter Wolf and Keith Richards? You did a track with those guys.
Yeah, I've done some records with Peter Wolf that I'm really proud of. They're like really organic and musical, and Tony Garnier's on some of the stuff, Bob Dylan's band, and
Duke Levine. Did you work with Duke on anything?
Yeah, and Duke is on this stuff. Great,
nice guy,
great
player.
And there was on the Sleepless record, I think it's a song called Too Close for Comfort, and they hired Keith to come in and play, and it was a blast, and Keith was there. And this is another thing that we were talking about, people that still have a love for music, like Keith. It really has that spirit, man. Like he was a blast. His sound, he had some really hip shit like the Magnetone amp thing and the really thick guitar cable, I remember. And anyway, the count off is like, it's kind of this swampy shuffle thing, and Pete says something like, and da-da-da, love, count it off, Shawn, and Keith yells, yeah, let me hear you, Shawn, or something, and just to hear, Keith, oh my God, he said my voice.
That's so cool, man.
But that was really a thrill to get to work with him. And then last year we did a thing, Chuck Leavell, the great keyboard player.
Yeah, the keyboard player, sure.
Song. He had a big band record, and we did a gig for that record here in New York, and Charlie Watts came down. And then Charlie Watts ended up coming up and playing on a song, and it was amazing getting to meet him, and such a nice cat. And again, you felt this thing about people that have aged, so where their spirit and love for music is still really there,
Yeah.
And Charlie has that thing too, very interested in drums and up about talking about them and the whole thing. It's inspiring to see that, and cats that are older.
Yeah. He's been around a minute. It was was John McCurry on that gig?
He was, exactly. Yeah.
Right. Right. Because he was telling me about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a good guy.
Yeah. Great.
Levon Helm. That had to be a thrill for you.
Yeah.
You got a Levon Helm jacket on.
Oh yeah. We got a gig coming up this Friday. It's wild. First thing back out of all this quarantine stuff. I think we're doing a taping for the Newport Jazz Festival. Maybe it's like a taping to be streamed. So we're going up there. He had this whole Renaissance rebirth kind of career thing that happened. He had this barn up in Woodstock, and this Midnight Ramble thing that was happening. And then, man, they won a couple of Grammys with that. And they would have two drummers, like you played with him sometimes, and he'd go out and play mandolin on some things like Rag Mama Rag and stuff like that. And what was so wonderful about Levon is he was such a joyful presence to be around, like a smiling player, like, just so much happiness. And also he had a feeling very inclusive feeling about everybody being there and the love and joy of it. It wasn't like a cliquey thing. Like sometimes in New York, there can be a thing like, it's this group of cats and that, and, it's all cool. I get it. But Levon was sort of like the arms wide open feeling, and
that's the era that he came up in, which was his journey in that era. That's, I think, more people you could afford to be like that. It wasn't like everybody was competing for the 4 gigs or that are out there.
Right. Yeah. And his sound, the way he tuned the drums, and a little bit muffled and soulful, just soulful touch, man, and wide kind of in between shuffle straight things sometimes. But again, one of these people that if you're just around them and seeing them play, you can soak up so much, by just paying attention, But the big thing is just how joyful and happy and inclusive he was in that situation. It was great.
Yeah, that is when you get to be around someone like that, it's a pretty special. It's like magic, actually.
Yeah.
When it's almost like you kind of want to like bathe in that, because it feels good, because it's nice, man. When somebody doesn't have an agenda and it's all about, hey man, let's have fun. And that's a pretty cool. And certain people can have that at times, but when you get a guy who that's just who he is, that's magic, man. I think so. Anyway.
Yeah.
And let's do one more. Richie Havens.
Yeah, I was on a Richie Havens record. I think it's the last one that he made, maybe before he passed away. And what was interesting about those sessions was that Richie plays such a percussive, busy style, and he was used to sort of working, I think, with a group that had a cello maybe, and then him and then someone else. So it was a group that he was touring with that wasn't necessarily have drums, And but it was one of those situations where, the challenge was, obviously great musician and but trying to find what's going to sit inside of how much space he has already going on, and how to approach that.
So because he's so percussive, you had to figure out where do you fit in to not take away from what he's doing percussively.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
interesting.
So do you like not use your right hand on the hi-hat or cymbal and just play, kick and snare, or come up with a part that has a lot of space to it that fits around him carrying the thing? And, if that works, is the producer cool with that? Or is he hearing this like he'd actually like to grit a fuller drum track because later they're going to maybe try to thin out Richie's thing a little bit, like all that discussion comes into play too, which is so interesting how you track in situations like that, how you might track at the time of the session and then how it evolves. Like
I'm amazed. I can't believe, like, I've never been exposed to what you're saying. I have not heard yet. Like, you're thinking down the line, you're not just thinking about how this sounds now, you're thinking all the various treatments that they can give this thing in post. And how do you accomplish, wow. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Like I've been with certain artists that like they may play super busy. And then let's say it's the first couple of sessions with the producer and everybody together. And the producer is like, maybe not going to fight the battle about getting into it with the artist about their thing being too busy or not feeling great or out of pocket. And he just wants to accomplish the basic tracks, but with the artist there, so the artist feels a part of it, like all the different layers.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so, because there's been times where I've done some things where it starts out with acoustic bass and then, the whole thing has been, it's kind of like a front porch feeling, and we want a feathered kind of approach with blast sticks, and then, man, 3 months later, they've all freaked out and there's like electric guitars on it and electric bass, now it's an acoustic. And so all of a sudden the feathered front porch drum thing isn't, but it's
Yeah.
wild how that, how having a sense of vision about how strong you might need to be with where it's headed as opposed to what it feels like just then, and with that Richie thing, it was interesting because he was taking up so much space, and it was like, all right, so I should play around this and let him have it, or are they going to go back and really just maybe have him sing against a whole nother setting with the, orchestrated differently,
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you wind
So,
up doing, and what did the final product come out like?
it went both different ways. They would keep what he did, and then there were other things where they kind of stripped away and it got simpler. And I think there was a cello thing and different stuff. I can't remember specifically, but I do remember it evolving and moving.
Wow, man, I am blown away by how many things you've got to be aware of. I mean, I'm really like that's just amazes me.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, and then sometimes it's just like, man, just show up and make it feel good. Please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else that you work with that like you have a feel good story about, or that you'd like to talk about because it just was important to you or something like that?
Oh man, remember this Ray Charles thing that was fun and it ended up on that Genius Loves Company thing. It was with Van Morrison, and it was Crazy Love, the two of them together. It was right before Ray passed away, and Phil Ramone. It was being around Phil Ramone, who was an amazing guy to be around, who had been a part of so much stuff, and so he was kind of producing, and it was a live thing that was going to be maybe used from the record if it turned out. And we show up at the rehearsal, and then Ray didn't really take the time to learn the song, and so we kind of go through it, and Phil would always have it tape rolling, And then live on the gig, we did it, and then Ray kind of spaced the bridge, and we had to kind of start off. But somehow they were able to take, because the tempos were close enough, because, we had sort of a tempo reference and sort of a thing that I could look at before I counted it off. And they kind of put the track together and made it work, but it was interesting, seeing Van and Ray together and that dynamic, and, two incredible icons. Being a part of the couple, 2 or 3 seasons of the Live from Daryl's House thing was a blast.
Right.
Some things with that were really fun. Great drummer.
You were part of the house. You were in the house band there?
Yeah, for the first couple of years, they had a touring band at the time, and T-Bone Walk, who's a great musician, since passed away, unfortunately, rest in peace. I knew him. He had been part of the SNL band in the 80s, and then he actually was part of that John Eddy thing, and then he was part of Hall & Oates forever. So anyway, T-Bone was running this thing. They had a great drummer on the West Coast that couldn't make it all the time for these tapings that they were going to start doing. And it was sort of like one of the first internet shows, that got started. And man, a lot of people have been through that. We did one with I don't know, it was 2 or 3 seasons, and it was a lot of fun, and ended up getting a lot of great traction. And great drummer Brian Dunn does it now. He tours with them, he can commit to the whole thing, but those were fun. It's fun getting to play with Sheryl. I got to tour with Sheryl Crow for a while back, and that was a blast. But man, I've been really lucky, really fortunate.
Man, you mentioned Van. I saw Van Morrison at the Bottom Line. That's not a massive club. I couldn't believe he was playing there. It was just such a great show. That place has gone quite a while now, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. It's a part of NYU now. It's kind of like a lecture hall, which is sad. Yeah. So many things have changed in New York, like the whole studio, the reality of studios even being in New York, is really evaporated in a lot of ways. It's just a handful. There's more things in Brooklyn, though, obviously, and then people have these home studio setups, which is, it's amazing, what you can get accomplished, man, in a spare bathroom,
Yeah,
like
everybody's
with the
doing
technology. It. Yeah. And there's been situations where we've cut at Avatar, the Power Station, Studio A, like this world-class room, and then something's changed with an arrangement. They want to recut a song, but they can't afford to go back in A, and it's amazing how you could cut drums in a home situation, but if you're sensitive to dialing in the room and, the compression thing, and you can make something that's in a closet almost feel like it was in any kind of physical space, you know, if you know sort of your way around the plug-in world, you know.
What do you miss
And
about, what do you miss about, you know, not to sound like an old man, but what do you miss about that versus now the
well,
most?
you know, there is such a difference, and I don't even know if it's better or worse. I hate to think of it that way because, you know, I have to survive in so many different situations with that. But it's funny, I was watching an interview with Joe Osborne, who was the great bass player for the Wrecking Crew, you know, and he was talking about this thing too, about like back in the day, he was talking about producers that, and Phil Ramone had this together where his thing was calling the people he thought were the right people and orchestrating that situation in a room and then letting it sort of happen. And Joe Osborne was talking about that. And then, you know, there's also a production sensibility where one person is controlling every aspect of, you know, the thing. And that can work too, you know.
Have you had that a lot?
Yeah, you know, I've gone in and been like the last person to play on something, and everything's been done by one person, but they want real drums, and they, you know. But you know, the difference of that when you have a group like with the Peter Wolf situation, let's say, where, you know, you have Duke Levine and he might have an idea, and then that's, you know, goes this, and something can evolve from that that's organic and musical. But, you know, man, I've seen people that have single-handedly dial in things that, because it's their singular sense of vision, it's very unique and cool, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's just different. And I do admit the hang is not as fun, you know?
Yeah.
And all that. You know,
Of
you're not
course,
hanging
yeah.
with all the cats. But, you know, it's like, who's to say that a Billie Eilish record, you know, that she does with her brother in her house has any more merit than if 10 cats showed up and there was a whole bunch of give or take. Like I just think it's different. I don't like to think of it as one's better than the other. You know?
Yeah, I
But
agree with you. I mean, it'd be hard to say that considering how many of those things are sold. A Billie Eilish record, you know what I'm saying? It'd be really hard to say, "Oh no, that's not good." Really, that marketplace seems to think so.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah. Tough question. Top 3 Desert Island discs in no particular order, and just for this minute.
Yeah. You know, it's wild because I have to like cover so much stylistic range. But you know, one thing is kind of like the Earl Palmer stuff with Little Richard. Man, I remember I got to go to a dinner with Earl Palmer once. It was wow. And remember reading this quote, and it was Charlie who had said something about if he could be anywhere in the history of music, it'd be like, you know, hanging at those Earl Palmer sessions with Little Richard, you know.
Charlie Watts said that.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
Interesting.
And then I remember being around Earl and asking him some things about that. And he was such a nice cat. So that comes to mind. You know, I'm such a fan of like the Roger Hawkins stuff, Muscle Shoals, and then, you know, all the Al Jackson stuff at Stax, and, you know, things, the Al Green stuff. And then, but also, you know, man, I love so much, you know, all the icon like Bonham. I love Purdy, you know.
Yeah.
I love Billy Higgins, you know, jazz. I love. So I wish I could say 3 records. It's hard.
I hear you, man.
Too hard. Yeah.
You know, you are someone that has clearly put a lot, not just time behind the kit, but you're a thinker, man. You can tell you're the guy who agonizes over, well, do I do it? You know, do I use a snare drum or do I put the tea towel on there and then use, when you're to become this level of excellence, there's sometimes a price to pay. What, if any, a price have you had to pay for the success you've had?
Yeah, well, it's interesting about that detail-oriented thing, you know, like especially when like in a room like this where if you're sent tracks and you're playing and you start producing yourself, it can be really easy to go down the rabbit hole of like kind of what you said, you know, this tweak and that tweak. And then, man, sometimes if you just step away for a half hour or the next day and come back, what you were obsessing over seems so minor compared to the big picture thing, you know. And so that's a really interesting learning thing about producing yourself. or, you know, tracking and you know, the one thing that's interesting is that, man, I've given everything to music. I love it so much. And so I don't have kids, you know, I've been lucky and been with Elaine for like 26 years. So I feel
Oh, dude,
great that I have,
congratulations, man.
have a, you know, a strong relationship, but like, I could never figure out how to do the kid thing in this music business, you know, as far as like being present as a father when, you know, so many of my heroes that I looked up to was so hard on them, like if they were on the road or, you know, trying to raise kids and be present and the whole thing like that. So I don't know if that's a sacrifice or not, but man, you know, I've given everything to, you know, my heart for music, you know. I mean, so, but I don't know if that's a sacrifice or not. But it's not like I have this well-rounded family life of like, you know, 3 grandkids and 4 kids that I'm proud of. That, you know, sort of like.
Oh, I understand that, man, and I give you a lot of credit for you know, for the commitment and congratulations. 26 years is a long time, man. Congratulations.
Yeah.
And it's a long time. And people, and if you're happy, people don't realize how much work that takes. And then you have some people, oh, well, if it's work, you shouldn't be married, man. You're full of shit. You can't be with, especially someone like who's got a career like you, where you're home half the time or 10% of the time, maybe some months, or 0% of the time. You know, you have to work. Even if you're home, I work at home for 20 something years. I've been with my wife 28. It's work, man. We got to like communicate, you know what I'm talking about. You know, it's worth it. It's well worth it, you know? And I thank God every day, but you know, that's a lot of stuff, man. So congratulations on that, man.
Yeah.
Do you have any hobbies outside of music?
You know, it's wild. It's funny that I've been in situations where I've had to sort of double, so it's still music, but like I've had to pick up other instruments and try to survive at a certain level on some gigs. And like, so recently, man, I've been diving into some other instruments like the mandolin thing, and I had to do some shit on accordion and the clawhammer banjo. Anyway, and
clawhammer banjo is not easy, man. How did you just pick that up? That is like, that's pretty tough.
I didn't just pick it up, but I had some friends that were into it, and it's like, man, that seems like some shit that would be fun to do on the front porch, you know? So, yeah, you're right. That whole initial investment of time for the stroke of getting that together is a bit of a thing. But it didn't seem as daunting as putting on the picks and trying to figure out an Earl Scruggs roll. You know? that scared me more, you know. But I've been having a lot of fun with that, man. You know, that's been fun. And, you know, it's a trippy business to age gracefully in, you know, as far as, and I'm trying to stay connected with what I love, what resonates in my heart in that way, you know, and man, that's been fun for me, you know, and I don't know if trying to get faster and more chopsy, or I don't know if that necessarily resonates with me, you know, at this point in my life so much. So anyway, hobby-wise, I don't know if that makes any sense. I like fishing, but we never get to go fish.
Where do you fish?
I did try to go fishing once in Central Park.
Did you? Hilarious. I was always wondering about that because you see guys going fishing there.
Yeah.
How was it?
It was a trip. I caught a couple little fish, and then Elaine thought we were going to die of some kind of trippy water disease because the water is kind of wigged out. But
yeah, you might.
Yeah, but Levon has a pond at his place, man. I have a little portable fishing pole that I go up with, and that's fun because he got a little pond back there. And the thing is, he's got these dogs, and the dogs jump them in the water, and they chase your lures around, you know.
Yeah. Well, dude, I'll tell you what. You come down to Tampa sometime, we'll go fishing because I love fishing.
Yeah,
fishing and cigars, dude. There is nothing as relaxing as fishing and cigars. I mean, it's like you can't do anything else, man. It's just that's why I used to go fishing sometimes because it would be the only time I would smoke a cigar where I'm forced to have a block of time to do it, you know?
Yeah. Well, count me in on that. Yeah.
I will. This is a tough question, man, especially for you because you're such a humble, soft-spoken guy. What do you like most about yourself?
Yeah. Well, I do think that, you know, I've been so fortunate, but I also know how hard I've sort of worked to pull it together. So I have it makes, I feel self-made in that way. Like I don't feel like a lot was just handed over, I mean, but I've had some very fortunate breaks, but I can see how I work to get into those situations. I guess I hate, musicians. There can be a tendency sometimes for people to talk shit about other musicians. That's one of my least favorite things to sort of be around. And I don't like being a part of that, and I try to hope that I don't, that can be such a drag, the whole tearing other people's playing down or that kind of shit. I hate that. So I try to be a nice cat.
You're a super, let me tell you, man, you're incredible. You are like a true optimist. I mean, I don't know you. I mean, you could be putting your best Sunday suit here for me, but I get the feeling you're a true optimist because, very consistent. And even I've heard other interviews and with you, and it's extreme. I've thought that every time I said, man, your level of appreciation for the things for the opportunities you have is really sincere, and it's just nice. It's like being around Levon Helm when you're seriously, when you're around someone like that, it's like, wow, that's nice.
No, thank you. No, I really, I'm appreciative of all those opportunities. There's no doubt about it. But I also, understand that when you're given an opportunity like that, you have to sort of be present and
well, you've done the work though, man.
Yeah.
You ever heard of Jason and the Scorchers?
Yeah.
This morning, I had Werner E. Herzog on, the guitar player, and he said a quote. I don't have my paper here, but he said something like, "Man, if you've done the work," because he said, "I never get nervous when I go on stage." He goes, "Because I've done the work, and if you've done the work, you should be ready to throw down anytime." And so that's like you've done the work, man.
And that's interesting about that book that we were talking about, I don't know if it's in that psycho-cybernetics thing, but also, there's other books like The Inner Game of Music and some of those things that are about performance anxiety, but where if you can turn, like, it's like athletes who perform better under stress, like this idea of like they actually rise to the occasion. And man, with the drum thing, you've got to, if you do your homework going into a situation, it's like, give me the ball, coach, because we'll knock it out of the damn park right the fuck now. That thing about a drummer that has confidence and the swagger to be like, yeah, motherfucker, let's do this.
Yes.
And it's interesting. Like, I think you would want that in your drummer, but also that can be too much sometimes, and you don't want that. You want somebody to just please pick up a pair of brushes and sit inside this acoustic guitar. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean you can't do that having the same attitude. I would rather have that. I want that with a musician, a friend, my dentist, fucking doctor, the pilot that's flying the plane. I want everybody, ideally, that's like comforting, man. I want that guy because I feel like, okay, I can let go. You could do your shit. I don't got to think about you doing your shit, That's, no, I think that's awesome, man. That's the person you want. 2 more questions, man, and I can't thank you enough for your time. This has been a joy talking with you, Shawn. Best advice you've ever been given, and who gave it to you?
I remember I was at Indiana, and this guy that ran the program there was David Baker, this great, famous teacher, the jazz program there. And I remember I was studying with him, and we're doing something kind of complicated or something. And then he said, man, this is all cool. But he says, the bottom line is when you're on a gig, man, let some of this shit go if you want. He said, but play from your heart, And it was this, I think any instrument is a transparent thing, drums especially, you can sense someone that's coming from that space, and anyway, I think that was the great words, be playing from your heart. Yeah.
Right on, man. I thought of one other question I'm going to ask you besides the last one, but who is there? I want to support you here, man. I want to put this out in the universe. Who have you not played with that you want to? Let's put it out in the universe right now, man. Get this psycho-cybernetic shit going right now.
Uh, uh, I don't know. I guess, man, I don't know.
This is one opportunity, Shawn. We got to put it out.
Yeah. Now I got to hang out with McCartney. I worked with his son, and so I got to work with Paul sort of in a roundabout way, and that was a really thrill. Was a thrill. I was going to say, Paul McCartney or something. I got to play with James Brown with those crazy Pavarotti concerts, and BB King. Oh man, I just
Jeff Beck.
like I've had such. Yeah, that would be a thrill. Yeah, I'd love to do that. Yeah, Jeff Beck, I love it.
Yeah. All right, man. We just set the intention for the universe.
Yeah.
That's it, man. We need Jeff Beck. But you better get his ass on my show if he comes, if he hires you. You got to say, hey, man, this guy in Florida made this happen.
Yeah.
You got to do his show.
Right.
Last question. Biggest change, Shawn, in your personality over the last 10 years, let's say, and how much of that has been intentional and how much is a natural part of aging?
I think being able to let go more and be at peace with what happens and accepting of all of that, and try to have an understanding and not push back or fight or claw or try to keep something happening, like just be able to let things go,
Like be less willful, not be part of the results committee.
Yeah, right.
I'm telling you, man, it's the least. It takes so much stress off your. I mean, for me, it was like a magic pill when I started thinking like that.
Yeah,
it's just.
But the idea that the universe is unfolding as it should,
right,
and being accepting of that. I think growing into that and accepting it is cool.
Yeah, man. Right on.
Yeah.
Dude, I cannot thank you enough. It's been such a joy talking to you, man. I know how busy you are. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. This is very cool. I would love to tell everybody to go see Shawn in concert. I cannot do that. But if you are looking to work with him and have him work with you on some tracks, go to this website. It's called House of Diablo, diablo.com. Just enter. There's a contact form there. Just let him know what you're looking for, and he'll get back to you. Just give him enough information so he could actually respond. And if you're looking for someone that's a drummer, you'd be foolish not to work with this man. So is there anything else that you want to promote, talk about, pitch, anything?
No, I think I'm cool. And man, I really appreciate you having me. Thanks, man, for just great, really a blast getting to talk to you. And thank you, man. Thank you.
Likewise. Yeah. Thank you. Hang on one second. We'll wrap this up. Everybody, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this, please share it on your social media channels. Whenever you see Shawn coming to town or something he's doing, support him. He's a fantastic, go into his catalog, go to allmusic.com. This guy has played on like everything. He's a legend in New York. Everybody knows him. I know you don't want me saying that, but that's okay. It's just the truth. And that's about it. Most important, especially nowadays, man, remember that happiness is a choice. So choose wisely. Be nice. Go play your guitar or your drums and have fun. Till next time, peace and love, everybody. I am out. Shawn, thank you so much, brother.
All right. Thank you. Yeah.